Touch the leg. Welcome to Tibet This Week, a weekly news that tells you about Tibet, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and Central Tibetan Administration. The headlines of the week. His Holiness the Dalai Lama joins Compassionate Leadership Summit. Young Indian research scholars makes Tibet center of Himalayan discourse. Central Tibetan Administration holds first digital strategy development meeting. Tibetans in the US undertakes Tibet awareness visits and programs. His Holiness the Dalai Lama interacted with a group of 15 young leaders from different parts of the world in the audience hall at his residence for 2 days from Tuesday this week. His Holiness emphasized the importance of the oneness of humanity, secularism and cultivation of altruism, saying human beings have to live together and the young people have a very important role to play in it.
Younger generation, till the global warming reach such stage, whole world burning, till that day, youth have very important role. I always feel now we should look past on, belief or concept, my nation, their nation. Now that gone, we have to live together. I always say 7 to 8 billion human beings, we are same. Only this world is our home. So now, no use to think my nation, their nation, and fight and create army, weapon. That's old thinking. Now we have to think we all human brothers, sisters. We have to live on this planet together. So I firmly believe now we really need concept oneness of 7 to 8 billion human beings. We are the same. We are actually human brothers, sisters.
Richard Davidson, professor of psychology and psychiatry and an old friend of His Holiness, moderated the summit. The summit, titled Compassionate Leadership Summit, is co-organized by Tara Bennett Goldman and Dan Goldman, who had a short exchange with His Holiness by a video link. On Monday this week, the Tibet Policy Institute organized the 4th Young Indian Research Scholars Conference for 3 days at Sara College in Dharamshala. The theme for the conference, Tibet and the Himalayas, brought together young Indian research scholars from the Indian subcontinent to present their scholarship on Tibet and the Himalayan region. The event began with an inaugural address by Khenpo Sonam Tempel, the Speaker of the Tibetan Parliament in Exile, who highlighted the global significance of Tibet. The speaker also highlighted the importance of the need to present facts in the face of China's misleading historical narratives. Professor Tanga Bahadur Supa, the former Vice-Chancellor of the University of Sikkim, focused on the dire need for the younger generations to become more responsible and attentive to the cause of Tibet. 35 scholars from the conference spoke on the various subjects from state and security, relations between Tibet and Western Himalayas, Buddhism and culture in Eastern Himalaya, the Tibetan exile freedom movement and the trans-Himalayan ecology development, climate change, trade and exchanges. The speaker Khimpo Sunam Tempel on Friday last week received Dr. Eliska Zigova, the ambassador of Czech Republic in India, who paid a visit to the Tibetan parliament in exile. The Central Tibetan Administration held its first digital strategy development meeting this Thursday. Sikyong Pemba Tsering shared Kasha's idea of involving young Tibetan computer professionals in developing sustainable future for the Central Tibetan Administration's digital structure and functioning.
For a sustainable future of the digital structure, digital operations and management, we will have a core team in the Tibetan Computer Resource Center by not necessarily increasing the number of civil servants, while we seek cooperation from the younger generations of Tibetans to use their skills. So this will be an approach where we will be involving a lot more younger generations of Tibetans to be in a position to work with the CTA. At the same time, CTA will exercise its role in looking after all that through them. So this will have multi-effects at all levels.
The two-day meeting saw presentation on the Central Tibetan Administration's IT infrastructure and security, IT policy and guidelines and e-governance. The meeting was attended by several professionals from computer and information technology firms and academies, in addition to observers from the departments of CTA. Sikyong Pemba Tsering on Wednesday this week addressed a group of aspiring journalists from the Delhi School of Journalism who were on an educational tour to the Central Tibetan Administration. The visiting students were illuminated about the political status quo of Tibet, the inception of Indo-Tibet relations, the advent and expansion of Buddhism in Tibet, and the implications of Tibet's climate crisis upon countries sharing rivers originating from Tibet, among other key subjects. Sikyong Pemba Tsering and the delegation of the Central Tibetan Administration concluded their official engagement in Brussels and Sweden on Tuesday this week. On Thursday last week, the CTA delegation led by Sikyong Pemba Tsering, Department of Information and International Relations Kalin Nurzen Dolma and Tibetan parliamentarians had a welcome lunch hosted by Frederick Naumann Foundation for Freedom Brussels office and met with Tibet interest group members in EU, President of European Parliament, Vice President of Responsible for Human Rights and Democracy, and liberal stakeholders and foreign chapters of liberal parties. The delegation had interview engagements with Brussels Daily newspaper, met with officials of Belgium government and briefed them on the pressing human rights situation in Tibet, including the repression of Tibetans under the zero COVID policy, mass DNA collection drive of Tibetan population, the operation of colonial-style boarding schools in Tibet by the Chinese authorities, and the violation of freedom of religion. In Sweden, Sikyong Pemba Tsering met with Swedish parliamentarians, government officials, think tanks, media, international development organizations, Tibetans and Tibet supporters to bolster Sweden and EU cooperation in addressing Tibetan cause. This week, Tibetans in the US were seen actively participating in the creating awareness on Tibet by visiting congressmen, organizing Tibet festivals, and celebrating the anniversary of conferment of US Congressional Gold Medal upon His Holiness the Dalai Lama. This week, Tibetan Parliament member from North America, Thundup Tsering, and the representatives from the Regional Tibetan Association based in Massachusetts visited the office of Congressman Jim McGovern to extend deep gratitude to Congressmen for introducing legislation supporting the Tibetan cause. A group of Tibetans and non-Tibetan volunteers represented Tibet at the 2022 Indianapolis International Festival held for 3 days from Thursday last week. The volunteers set up an information booth on Tibet's unique arts and crafts in addition to general info on Tibet by displaying actual handmade crafts. The Tibetans living in Indiana participate in the festival since its inception, and the Tibettv in the past was managed by International Tibet Independence Movement, a non-profit organization co-founded by the late Taksi Rinpoche Thupten Jigme Norbu, the elder brother of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Currently, Tibettv is organized and maintained by Indiana Tibetan community, accompanied by Tibetans in Ohio and Kentucky. For 2 days, Tibetan people living in US celebrated the 15th anniversary of the US Congressional Gold Medal conferment to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Around 10 Tibetan associations led members of the Tibetan communities comprising of Vermont, Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, Capital Area, Washington State, Tibetan American Foundation of Minnesota, Canada Tibetan Association of Ontario, Northern California, and Tibetan Alliance of Chicago celebrated the occasion. His Holiness the Dalai Lama was conferred the U.S. Congressional Gold Medal on 17th October 2007 for being a relentless advocate for peace and compassion, contributing significantly in promotion of non-violence and cultivation of basic human values. That is all for this week. See you in the next episode of Tibet This Week. Until then, have a great weekend.